So now I would like to start our first presentation. Our first presentation is going to be given by Choate Rosemary Hall from Connecticut.
I'm Choate Rosemary Hall, and for our presentation we decided to focus on Iran and the challenges, risks, and opportunities that it poses to non-proliferation. So we're from Choate Rosemary Hall. This is the main campus. The school is about 850 students from all over the world, about 75% boarding and 25% day students. It's located in Wallingford, Connecticut, or central Connecticut, and it's in between New York and Boston, and has a population of about 50,000 people. I myself am from New York. I grew up there in New York City for the first 4 years of my life, and then moved to Westchester County, which is about half an hour outside of the city.
And I'm from South Korea. So to start off with, we're going to start with the basic components of nuclear technology. So it's essential to note the difference between nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. So as you see in the slide, fission is when an atom splits into two with a large release of energy, and in particular it's then a chain reaction. And nuclear fusion is when two or more smaller and lighter atoms combine into one, and the mass converts into energy. And it's the release of energy that causes destruction in nuclear weapons. And most nuclear weapons today are, such as those in US, Russia, Britain, France, and China, are two-stage thermonuclear weapons. And what that means is that they utilize both fission and fusion. So the physical impact is much larger. And so to basically summarize it, the primary fission reactor generates the heat needed to trigger the secondary fusion reaction chain, and the fusion reaction chain releases a massive amount of energy. And so now we're going to look at the physical impact of nuclear weapons. So there's a dual nature in nuclear technology. There's the constructive side and the destructive side. We're first going to look at the destructive side. So nuclear radiation can be very detrimental to human health. Radiation causes cancer, mental retardation, immune system failure, and congenital defects. And it's also detrimental to nature. It pollutes the soil and the water and the atmosphere, and a few of the toxic substances released are plutonium, uranium, strontium, benzene, and cyanide, and mercury. And also the mining of the uranium and transportation and preparation of nuclear materials increase the risk of contamination in these water and soils. And also the main problem is that we still don't know what to do with the spent nuclear power plants and the fuel, so that's one of the destructive sides. And now we're going to explore the constructive sides of nuclear technology. So with controlled use, it can generate clean power, and by clean power I mean that it lacks carbon emission, so it's very clean. And it can be used for medical assessment and treatment, such as nuclear techniques provide much clearer images of both bone and soft tissue, better than X-ray technology, and it can identify and treat tumors, and the sterilization procedures are much better with nuclear technology. And it can also increase genetic variability and be used as fertilizers, and it can longer preserve foods. So nuclear technology has a very beneficial constructive side, and to transition into our regional part that we focused on was Iran, and Iran sees it that they can use it constructively, that they can get clean energy because they need it, and that it protects them from the threat of nuclear weapons. But before we explore into Iran more deeply, we're going to look at the motivations of other states. So many nations after World War II desire to have nuclear technology, to build nuclear weapons for security reasons. And for example, France pursued nuclear weapons specifically because the French military power must remain at least one order of magnitude superior to Germany's. And this was Professor Jacques Hyman. And a similar explanation can be given for Israel. It was rooted in the fear of the rising power of neighboring Arab states, and one of which are Egypt. And Egypt alone is 55 times larger in size and 11 times more population, so Israeli leaders felt compelled to neutralize the imbalance in power and pursued nuclear technology. And a similar explanation can be given in South Korea and North Korea. With South Korea being under United States umbrella, nuclear umbrella, it had a significant amount of help with nuclear technology and protection, so North Korea felt compelled to pursue nuclear weapons to protect itself. So now we're going to look at the motivations of Iran. Iran has been motivated to implement nuclear technology because of the threat posed by the United States. Since the 1950s, the United States meddled with Iranian affairs, and to just touch upon a few historic moments, are the hostage crisis of 1979 to 1981, and also in 1995, the United States placed the Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf, and even though the Iranians made it clear that they want the Fifth Fleet away, and Ayatollah Salehi actually said the American career leave the Persian Gulf immediately, the Americans still bothered Iran. And then in 1996, there was the Iran Sanctions Act signed with President Bill Clinton, and that placed a trade embargo on Iran, and that traumatized the Iranian economy and caused intense inflation. But despite these sanctions, Iran still pursued nuclear technology, and so recently, the House of Representatives passed the Nuclear Iran Prevention Act in 2013, and they said it shall be U.S. policy to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Apart from U.S. attempts, Iran also had conflicts with and tensions among other organizations such as International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and the UN Security Council. And in 1978, Iran signed the NPT Safeguards Agreement with IAEA, and IAEA checked regularly and did not find any proof of any clandestine efforts of pursuing nuclear technology. However, there was a proof of unprecedented amounts of uranium enrichment and nuclear production, so that caused a lot of tension. And in 2005, Iran was charged with non-compliance with NPT Safeguards Agreement when they refused to get rid of their uranium enrichment programs. So now I'm just going to briefly talk about the Geneva Conference that was held in November 24th, 2013. So Iran and these P5+1 countries met, US, Russia, China, Great Britain, and France. And the purpose from the Iranian side, I think, is that they wanted to reduce the sanctions because it was ruining their economy. And the purpose of the P5+1 countries being present here was that it was an opportunity for them to suspend their uranium enrichment programs, and basically it's a step towards ending the nuclear program, and Nick will return to the substance of this agreement later in the presentation.
Okay, so repeated violations and avoidance of the protocols by organizations such as the IAEA have led to an escalation of sanctions being placed on Iran over the last decade. And sanctions have been placed on Iran by the UN, the EU, and specific countries, most notably the United States. So UN sanctions began in 2006 when the UN demanded Iran suspend enrichment-related activities and cooperate with the IAEA. The sanctions also banned the supply of nuclear-related materials and technology and froze the assets of key individuals involved with the nuclear program in Iran. Later that year, the UN also imposed an arms embargo and expanded the freeze on Iranian assets. In 2010, the UN also banned Iran from participating in any activities related to ballistic missile technology and placed travel bans on individuals involved with the programs, and froze the funds of Iranian shipping lines and recommended that states inspect these ships when they were entering their nations. The UN also prohibited the opening of Iranian banks in foreign territories and prevented Iranian banks from entering into a relationship with United Nations recognized banks because they believed it might contribute to the Iranian nuclear program. The EU also placed restrictions on cooperation with Iran in foreign trade, financial services, energy, and technology sectors, and agreed to an oil embargo that began in July of 2012. The United States has imposed an arms ban and an almost total economic embargo on Iran, which includes sanctions on companies that do business with Iran, a ban on all Iranian origin imports, and sanctions on Iranian financial institutions, and an almost total ban on selling aircraft or repair parts to Iranian aviation industries. So I'm going to briefly discuss some of the nuclear sites present in Iran that are seen by Israel and Saudi Arabia as a threat to their national security. So the Bushehr nuclear power plant is located 11 miles southeast of the coastal city of Bushehr in southern Iran. Construction began in 1975, but was halted in July of 1979 due to the Iranian Revolution. Construction resumed 20 years later in 1995 to install the existing Bushehr building and the pressurized water reactor. In 2007, Russia began delivering nuclear fuel to the power plant, and construction was completed in March 2009, and the plant is now operational. Arak is also one of the two sites exposed by spokesman for the People's Mujahideen of Iran in 2002. It's a heavy water plant, and in August 2006, Iran announced that they would begin production of heavy water. This water is used in nuclear processes, in reactors, and other plants. And this reactor was intended to replace the Tehran Nuclear Research Center in the capital. Natanz is also a good example of the lengths that Iranians will go to protect their nuclear facilities from countries that might seek to destroy them. So Natanz is a hardened fuel enrichment plant that is built 8 meters underground and protected by a concrete wall 2.5 meters thick, and which itself is protected by another reinforced concrete wall and is buried under 22 meters of earth. So the IAEA Director General Mohammed El-Baradi visited this site in February of 2003 and reported that 160 centrifuges were operational and with more than 1,000 under construction. However, today there are approximately 7,000 centrifuges, of which 5,000 are producing low enriched uranium. Yaz is also a site in Iran that is concerned with mineral studies and uranium, and Tehran is the oldest nuclear research reactor in Iran. Now, over the last half century, tensions in the Middle East have often escalated over the existence and expansion of Israel. Israel is seen by many Arab nations as a threat to a homogeneous region otherwise composed of Arabs and Muslims. Israel has been directly threatened several times, and when Israel was granted independence in 1948, it was attacked the next day. And the Arab-Israeli war that ensued lasted 9 months. And several Arab nations attacked Israel, including Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The coalition of Arab nations led fully coordinated attacks against Israel, and at the end of the war, Israel had actually accumulated more territory than it had at the beginning of the war. Since the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, Israel has been in 6 other recognized wars with other Arab states. This includes the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and the Sinai War. Continuous conflicts involving Israel and the rest of the Middle East has led Israel to take defense of its country very seriously. And although they have not publicly acknowledged possessing nuclear weapons, the international community strongly believes that Israel has nuclear weapons capabilities. And this speculation is one of the main reasons why Arab and North African countries began to pursue nuclear weapons technology. Many of those programs have since been abandoned or eliminated through force. However, the most recent threats to nuclear proliferation in the Middle East are Iran and Syria, which have actively pursued nuclear technology. And this situation with Israel serves as a motivation for Iran and other states to pursue nuclear weapons. The largest obstacle to further non-proliferation efforts will be managing these types of regional conflicts. As indicated in the previous section, local conflicts have escalated to the development of nuclear weapons in several theaters. Countries that perhaps have no intention of developing nuclear weapons technology are faced with critical national security decisions when a neighboring power acquires nuclear weapons technology. And when faced with the decision of whether or not to pursue nuclear weapons for themselves in the interest of national security, or through the principle of mutually assured destruction, the safe decision seems to be to pursue nuclear weapons technology. Regional conflicts and the development of nuclear weapons in surrounding regions demand that countries take a hard line in decisions that will protect the integrity of their state. Nations make decisions based on their own national security, and when regional proliferation forces their hand, they will often choose to protect their interests and not think about global non-proliferation. So a 6-month agreement was reached in January of this year, and picking up from Cindy's earlier remarks on the Geneva Convention, it outlined a plan of bringing Iran and other Western powers closer together on the table when concerned with non-proliferation. And so the 6-month agreement requires Iran to limit its enrichment of uranium to 5%, which is enough for nuclear reactors, but not enough for weapons-grade uranium. And it's also kind of prohibited from producing 20% enriched uranium, which is one step away from weapons grade. And Iran also must neutralize its 20% enrichment stockpile for these 6 months when the agreement is enacted. And exchange economic sanctions will be eased for 6 months on Iran, and that's believed to produce an estimate of $7 billion over the lead.
So we came up with a 4-year plan to solve this problem, and so by the end of 2014, Iran should have a permanent deal with the U.S., UN Security Council, and IAEA.
And by mid-2015, Iran should rid itself of all funding regarding nuclear science.
And by the end of 2015, Iran should rid of all uranium enrichment programs and capabilities.
And by the end of 2016, Iran should rid itself of all functioning nuclear reactors.
And by the end of 2017, all active nuclear scientists originally or previously involved or interested in developing Iran's nuclear program should be relocated and offered better incentive than other countries as research scientists, other countries that are allowed the nuclear technology and programs.
And sort of motivation that would kind of ensue that they would want to give up nuclear energy, and infrastructure for energy aid will be given by allied countries with allowed nuclear capabilities. So we're gonna conclude by talking about the situation in Ukraine, which changes our proposal quite a bit as it presents us with new problems on the nuclear non-proliferation front. So the current situation throws a potential obstacle as Russians, who are key negotiators in the talks between the West and Iran, may no longer be a steady hand in the negotiations. Ukraine now serves an example for why a nation should not give up its nuclear weapons. Although this may not have prevented Russian action in the Crimean referendum, it certainly would have been a deterrent and put Ukraine on equal ground with its former nation. Iran will surely look to this situation going on in Ukraine and reevaluate the pros and cons of being a power without nuclear weapons. This situation calls us to reflect on our 4-year plan, and it certainly throws obstacles in the path to nuclear non-proliferation.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So if there's any questions, we can answer. Thank you.
Any questions? No?
Don't go ahead. Go ahead. So, I'm Amanda Sayre. I'm a recent graduate from the Monterey Institute with an MA in Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies. And I've participated as an aide to Zaka for the last 2 years in this program. So you want to have Iran give up all of their nuclear energy?
Right, so this was just a suggested plan that we kind of thought up because we felt that it's been very difficult for Iran to either have a nuclear program without the West feeling like they might be developing nuclear weapons. So we kind of said, it's either that they're allowed to have nuclear weapons, nuclear technology and capabilities, so they can produce clean energy, and that gives them the potential to produce nuclear weapons, or they just do not have the nuclear capabilities at all. And we decided that the current situation it would be better if they did not have any nuclear capabilities at all, because that would make the West feel more comfortable, and like we proposed in our plan, they would help with energy infrastructure and giving energy to Iran.
And personally, I feel as Iran over the past years did not do so well in complying with the agreements that they said they would make, and they made a lot of tensions and created tensions. So I would rid all of their nuclear capabilities.
I guess I have a follow-up question and or comment. So if you want Iran to give up all of their nuclear energy, what sort of incentive do they have to do so? One might be to rejoin the international community economically, but maybe think about why they would have wanted nuclear weapons to begin with and from a security standpoint, and how can you get them to give up that if they don't have any security guarantees from other countries? So if they wanted the weapons for security reasons, what guarantees that they have that other countries won't invade them or or how do you resolve that issue?
Well, so I don't think they're necessarily in threat of invasion from Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, Pakistan's a neighbor and they have nuclear weapons, but they're also Shiite countries, so I don't think they're necessarily going to ever invade Iran. The one threat to national security would be Israel. So I guess a bargaining chip would bring Israel and Iran closer together and have talks to kind of outline their intentions for the region and try to make them more comfortable with each other. Obviously, Israel has not come out and said nuclear weapons, that they possess nuclear weapons, although that is largely believed. But I think also foreign aid, like large amounts of foreign aid would be a great incentive in coming to the bargaining table.
Also, maybe another solution could be, in our proposal, we said that Iran would have a permanent deal with U.S. and UN Security Council, and IAEA, maybe U.S. could be, provide security like they are to South Korea, with a permanent, well-set deal.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Did you have a question?
So, actually, I had to
Oh, okay. Any other questions? Okay, so let's give them a big hand. Thank you.